Welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah. I am with the Midwest Writing Center. I'm super excited today to have with me Elaine K Olson, who is a local author, a pastor. She's all sorts of things. she's the Renaissance man of the arts. And having seen some of her work before it was published, having experienced her work, I was really looking forward to her debut publication. If that's maybe not the totally proper thing to call it, her memoir, which came out at the end of last year from Legacy Book Press. It's called My Walk with Grief. And she's here with us today to talk about writing, talk about grieving, talk about sense of self. It's I think going to be one of our best interviews. Thank you for being here, Elaine.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm delighted. Thank you.
I always feel really silly when I get excited about the guest, because I can't help but just be like way too effusive. And I fear that I'm just going to embarrass people and they'll never talk to me again. But that is the beauty of being able to share things I care about with people, right?
Right. Absolutely.
I used to have a job where I met like really famous international authors all the time, and I was just starstruck all the time. And my colleagues would be like, dude, what's wrong with you? And I would be like, you know what? I'm enjoying this so much more than you. So I'll be starstruck.
Very fun.
So with that, I'm a little starstruck. I want to first talk about, I know from seeing you speak, that you did not always think of yourself as a writer.
No, I did not. In fact, yeah, there was a long time when I did not see myself as a writer.
So I'm going to ask two versions of probably the same question along those lines. How old were you when you started to think of yourself as a writer / call yourself a writer?
I was 70.
I love that. I was hoping that it was a bigger number.
Yes, 69, 70, but probably my 70th year is when I could say I'm a writer. So
I love this because we all think that if we haven't done something by 20 or whatever, then we're not really that thing, which is garbage. Like, you've got your whole life ahead of you. And also, like, I like to tell my students, I didn't make a good decision till I was 24.
And I'm still trying to make them. So,
they're not all good decisions now. But I like to think it's of some comfort that, you don't have to have it all figured out yet.
Right.
And when did you start writing?
Well, the story I tell is this. When I was in 4th grade, I wrote poetry, and I wrote a poem that got chosen as part of a poetry contest in my little town in Nebraska. So I got this award that said I won one of the prizes, and I thought, this is cool. And then I wrote poetry and all that kind of thing through junior high and high school, which is what we do when we have to express all of our emotions and heart in some way. I was a writer for the school paper and for the annual, and I did all that. So then I tried to say, yes, I'm a writer a little bit. At least that's what some of the stuff I did. I went to college and was dating a man. And in fact, it's Mark that the story is about in My Walk with Grief. And I wrote him a love poem, and he was studying writing, and he was a good writer. And he read my love poem, and then he tore it apart literally as it not being a very good thing. And so, I had the wrong words, and I put it in the whatever. Everything was wrong. And so I stopped writing, period. And because that critique was, because I wrote from the heart, and that critique was so...
That level of vulnerability, I'm so upset. Like, I've heard this story before, and I'm still so upset. And like, I don't even know if shocked is the word. I can't, to be so vulnerable and to be shot down like that.
Yeah, well, welcome to being macho guy in college at the time. So anyway, the crazy thing is I still married him, but but I stopped writing publicly. I began to write a journal, personal journals, and I have journals for a lifetime that would write in, and some periods of my life I wrote in it more than other periods of my life. And I came to understand that journal writing is this kind of mirror of your soul. And so you write in a journal, and it's like looking in the mirror when you try to comb your hair and you see what hairs are all out of place or where you have a pimple or whatever. And that's kind of what journal writing is for me. And so I wrote a lifetime in my journal. I wrote as Mark died, but there was something in me as he died and as I lived with it that I had to tell the story. I just had to get it out. Not only for myself to write it, to make sense of it for me, but I wanted to write it because maybe it would make sense to somebody else. So then I started writing the memoir. And when I started writing the memoir, I was asked by my church to write some devotions for a Lenten series that the church was doing. And so I wrote 40 short reflections. And then I took part of the story and sent it to a magazine called Christian Century. And they published a little vignette from what I wrote. And then I shared the book with Legacy Press, and they accepted it and wanted to publish it. And then I could say, well, maybe I'm a writer. I guess I'm a writer. So now I put that on my card along with psychotherapist and pastor and all that.
Therapist. That's the one I forgot. Which of course is not, your whole identity is not the jobs that you have, of course. But I think that is, I don't know, so well-rounded to be both a pastor and a therapist and a storyteller. That's
it combines a lot of things. Well, it engages life on all kinds of levels, the kind of emotional level and spiritual level and head level and engagement with others, community. So it kind of puts all those together.
So I like to ask that question about, how you came to see yourself as a writer, to really all writers. And I think everybody really has the same answer, even though, of course, that's not true, which is that we all have this young self that believed themselves to be a storyteller or an artist, and something in life pushes that away until we come back to it. And,
yes.
And someone so, and I've talked to a ton of writers, but it's especially, I think, I don't know, inspirational, cathartic, comforting.
Yes.
To see someone with some success who also went through this process. And
even after many years. So
yeah,
to have it happen, which is pretty exciting for me, actually.
Yeah, I also want to say, I don't know, maybe I'll get to this in a minute, but your writing is really like straight to the heart, like no pulling punches, no dancing around what you're really trying to say. And I think that most people who like study writing are trying to get to that point. So it's also, I don't know, kind of scary that you did it without that.
Oh.
Of course. Actually later this week, I'll have another pastor on talking about, how writing sermons is just, epistolary writing. And so of course, as someone who does that, you're familiar with writing. It's not like you're a novice.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, I did write sermons, but I guess I never really considered that being a writer. And so, I'm trying to think, as I say that, I'm trying to think, well, what would be the difference? I guess, for me, the writing of the memoir was the telling of a story, but also done in a more creative way. even though when I write sermons, it's creative, but it feels like there has to be some kind of platitude in it in order to make people think or whatever. And that isn't necessarily what writing the memoir was about.
The difference is the way you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So funny.
That's
I didn't
a good way
even
of seeing it.
realize till I just said this just now that I have 2 pastors on this week. That's really funny.
Oh, that is really funny.
Let's go to church this week, friends. Uh,
Well, I didn't become a pastor till later either. So there's lots of movement in my story.
That was going to be my next set of questions was going to be, when did you become a pastor and when did you become a therapist?
I became a therapist first. When I grew up in the church, all right, and I grew up in a tiny little town in Nebraska of 300 people, and my whole life as a child with my parents was involved in the church and what the church was all about. And so there was always this sense that I would be connected with the church in some way. And at that time, with my age, no woman would be allowed to be ordained. And so in my young woman thinking, it was, I'll marry a pastor and then I'll be connected with the church, right? Well, I married a pastor.
Well, pastor's wife is a whole different thing.
But in the middle of all of that, I pushed and pulled pretty hard at the institution. Being a woman in the institution, trying to find my voice in the institution, all those kind of things. So I first became a psychotherapist after I was a liturgical artist, actually, and I have handwoven work throughout the United States. And then I became a therapist and started in private practice in 1979. So it's been a lot of years. No, that's not right. 89. Yeah, it was in 89, 90 that I started my therapy practice. So I did therapy first, and I had a private practice as a psychotherapist. So part of the vulnerability out of which I write, I think, comes from being open to other people's vulnerable stories and not being afraid of them, and trusting that entering the story actually leads someone to life. So I really trust that a lot. And then I was a therapist as Mark, my husband, died. We had been married 30 years. And then after his death, I went through a whole, which is what the book is about, a whole discovery of who am I and what am I about now. And then that's when I was ordained.
So that's something I tend to say, all writing is about identity, even if it's, not. And I think that that's something that's really, really beautiful in particular about memoirs, is that I think I'm going to get really like writery for a second. So
right.
Forgive me.
Yeah.
But we hear these quotes all the time. Like I write to figure out what I'm thinking, or I'm a writer because I sit down and let the pen bleed. Right. I think that one of those was, what? I'm not going to give credit to those quotes because I'm going to get it wrong.
I'm not remembering either, but yeah, I've heard those.
But with memoir, there's no pretense of I am doing this writerly thing, though it is, of course, a very writerly thing. It is just this base vulnerability and an honest, hopefully, account of identity. And I've told you, I haven't told the grand audience here, I haven't finished your book because it is so vulnerable and it very deeply affects me. I'm still only in the first section. I think there's 3 sections.
Yeah, 3 to 4. Right.
Depending how you count. Sorry.
Well, the first part is probably the
4. Yeah.
4 sections. Yeah. The first part is probably the most,
You know what you wrote.
I know. I only wrote it, but but I talk about the book in terms of three, even though there's four parts, I talk about the book as three reflections about living life. And when I sign my book, I say, I invite people to grieve deeply, live fully, and love greatly.
I did not get my, I bought my book signed and I was reading along with you. That is what you wrote.
Yeah. and so the very first part that you're still reading through is this part of grieving deeply, where I was the wife of a pastor and the pastor was dying, and I had to, I walked this double road of the man I loved for 30 years was dying, the father of my children was dying, and the pastor of a large community was dying. And so it was, I felt like I was wearing lots of hats, trying to figure out how to walk with him and walk with myself in terms of what I was experiencing, but what, and rightly or wrongly, felt like I needed to model for the community that we were part of as the pastor's wife. And so part of the writing is that vulnerability as well. So that first part is the most vulnerable and probably the most raw. And then there's the stories of dating and moving and trying to figure out who I was and trying to learn to connect with others and not be so radically independent. So, and then falling in love again.
What I was going to say, in terms of, I cannot get over how powerful the writing is. And, you know, a lot of the times when I'm like watching TV and I'm watching something that's not very good, but there's something going on TV that affects me or like, reminds me of my life, then I'll get emotional, even though it's maybe not that good. But I started reading this, I think I told you this, in preparation to see you read. And I had to put it down, which is, I've told you this, a huge compliment. You know, if you need to take breaks from a book because of how powerful it is, like that's a big deal. But then someone close to me died as well. And when I went to pick it up again, I just immediately started crying. So you can see that those are two different things. Like one is very, very powerful, and then one is like, oh, this hits too close to home.
Yes.
And I think that's, I don't know. I just want people to know that. This is my question. I'm just talking about you.
Well, actually, one of the primary points of feedback that I have received is the fact that it is raw and vulnerable, and that I write that I'm able to write in that open way that engages people.
People spend years and years trying to learn how to do that. So, you know, have an ego about it. I would if I were you.
Well, thank you. It just kind of happens through me. So I don't know if it's some of the therapy work I've done or the years of journal writing or what, but thank you.
So to rewind a bit, I know you started answering this question before I asked it, but how did the book come to be? You started out writing sermons?
Yeah, I started out when I was in seminary. I had to write academic papers, and in doing the writing of academic papers, I had a professor cover one page with all kinds of red scribbles, and at the top he said, "This isn't necessarily very theological, but it's very inspirational." And so it was that word of I could write in an inspirational way that said, "Oh, great!" And then from there I wrote sermons, and then I wrote those stories for the devotional, but I also had this need to tell my story. I just started sitting down and I made an outline of about 12 or 13 instances that I wanted to write about. And I just started writing them. And I decided to write from when Mark was dying until I remarried, which was over a 10-year period, and just tried to pull out the primary stories that affected me.
When did you decide to make a book of it?
Um, I was about halfway through writing it, and I was part of a writers group actually with that I was sharing the writing with Becky Langdon and Elaine Collins, and my husband Terry Haru, and I risked sharing it with a group of people and got very positive feedback about the writing, the fact that it was vulnerable and open and almost a sense of poetic prose at some points that people told me about. Huh?
No big deal.
And so getting the feedback that this was okay, this was good enough, helped me continue on. And so as the story kind of came together, I went, I'd really like to see if this could be published, because I think I often said that I wrote it for myself to find meaning in the story, and hopefully if I write it for others, it'll give them the courage to look at their own stories.
That is a question I wasn't going to ask, so I'm going to have to get back on track in a second. But you said something that really blew my mind one time, in regard to that, in regard to having meaning within your story. And I just really want to highlight it. I want as many people who can to hear it. So I apologize for interrupting this line of questioning, but when you talk about finding meaning in your story, I know that you mean that separately from like everything happens for a reason. That's not.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I don't see that everything happened for a reason, or it's much more when you engage the pain realistically of grief, and when you walk that walk of grief and you pay attention, there's something in it that is revelatory about the world and about yourself. And you can never prescribe that to anybody. And it isn't that the story makes it happen. It's that in the walking of the story, something gets discovered.
Yeah, so I think that that's really important, and that's really not the most writerly question. But I never promised to only ask writerly questions. But it's something, we hear a lot, particularly when bad things happen. People will say, everything happens for a reason. And you're like, cool, my best friend died.
Yes, I don't believe that. What I understand is that when I engage the pain of the story, when I engage the walk, when I look at it, as I move forward with it, there's some wisdom in it that I don't know what it is when I start. When Mark died, a friend told me, who was a pastor's friend whose wife died a year before Mark did, and we were close friends. And he said to me, resurrection is for the living as well as the dead.
Oh, I love that.
And I had no idea what that meant for me. What would my resurrection look like? But that became a seed that was planted inside of me. That as I moved forward through the grief and the creating a new life and what all that was, I kept wondering, what will my resurrection look like? What will that be? What will new life be? And so it wasn't so much I knew as much as I was going to pay attention to try to find it.
I love that so much. I was thinking about, my one of my best friends died when I was 23, 24. And her family was really religious and not very involved either. It was sort of complicated. But that's when I was hearing that a lot, including from the pastor, which really bothered me. And it wasn't until I heard you say finding meaning from it rather than that it happened for a reason that I really, I lost a lot of guilt. When I
Ah,
heard you say that, and that's been almost 10 years, you know?
oh, that's
um,
profound. That's absolutely amazing.
and yeah, I'm so grateful for that, because people will do that because they don't want to think things happened in vain, right? They don't want to think
Right.
that their pain is meaningless. But there's a difference between saying, God's plan was for us to lose someone, and saying we can find meaning in the hard things.
Yeah.
And I'm so
See,
grateful.
my understanding of the holy of God is the sense of profound love and compassion, which isn't about a God that makes bad things happen, but maybe a God that weeps with us when bad things do happen. And then as someone walks with us through those bad things, something something will grow. I don't know what, but something will. When I went to a workshop when I was the first couple of years after Mark's death, and to keep my therapy license, and one of the short little segments that they showed at one of the workshops was, and I forget which Disney movie it's from, but anyway, it was the Disney movie where they cut down all the forest, and all the forest was gone, and this elk walked into the forest and started to weep because the forest was all gone. But then in the weeping of this animal, the water from the tears watered the forest, and trees began to grow, and there was a whole new forest that grew from the tears, which actually is a profound story of life comes in weeping. It's the paradox of it all.
We're getting heavy. I didn't mean to.
Sorry.
So you said, I'm putting some quotes that stick out to me because you say beautiful sentences in the chat, and one of the things you said was resurrection is for the living as well as the dead. And there was this this is from Beloved, Toni Morrison. I read this line when I was like going through a breakup or something. I don't remember now, but the line I got from Beloved that's along those lines was, anything dead coming back to life hurts. And that's about, becoming more of a person, right? It's about
Yes,
the resurrection of self, not zombies.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. And it does hurt. Absolutely, it hurts. Yeah.
And it has to, I think.
It kind of has to. It's the sense of another image I had was from one of the therapists I worked with when I was grieving, was the sense of a woman giving birth to herself.
Mm.
And birthing is not painless, but yet something grows from it that we get surprised by. So
That's, I think that's something that maybe we should think about more as society, that giving life hurts. Because we talk about how beautiful and important and good it is, which it is, but that
it is.
doesn't make it painless.
It doesn't make it painless.
Right.
Not at all.
Today.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
Okay, so back to writing the book.
Back to writing the book.
So you're putting together, the most important, or something to that effect, stories from your marriage, stories of your grieving, and then you've got 3 more sections.
Then I have 2 more sections. Absolutely. And so those sections then talk about, well, let me look at them just to remind me how to use my brain.
Part 1 is before the death. Part 2
yes.
is beyond the grave. Part 3 is the in between. Love that, by the way. And part 4 is proceed as the way opens. That sounds like that AA thing. Do the next indicated thing.
Yeah, actually, proceed as the way opens, as I understand it, is a Quaker statement of spirituality, and as one is trying to discern about who they are, what it is, what you do is you pay attention to what opens and what closes. Least Heat Moon, when he wrote a book about taking rivers across the United States, he wrote in his the beginning of that book that one of the things he did as he followed the rivers across the US is that he would take his boats and proceed as the way opened. And so if he got somewhere and it closed, he would have to back up and turn around and go on a different path. So proceed as the way opens is that sense of paying attention to
all metaphors all the time.
All metaphors all the time. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's that part. Proceed as the way opens. The in between is that liminal time that we get caught in between an ending and a beginning, where one author around transitions talks about the time of being in a trapeze, where you fly from one swing to the next swing. And if you try to hold on to both swings at the same time, you don't go anywhere and you get stuck. And so you have to get the movement of one swing going, and you have to let go, and you fly through the air before you get to the next swing. And it's the most creative and the most terrifying time, is that time in between.
That's a great metaphor.
So the time in between is, what is it you see when you start to fly through the air? So this part of the book, of the in-between, is the stuff that I learned about myself and about what I needed in the world. Things like I needed to ask for help when I was one who preferred to do everything myself and not to ask for help, because being vulnerable was not okay. I had to do it myself.
I know that feel.
Yeah. I had to learn how to build friendships in a new way. When I was married to Mark, we were kind of a whole package. And after he died, I had to figure out, one way I talked about it was he was the full meal deal. The opening hors d'oeuvre and the main meal and the dessert and everything was all wrapped in the same meal. But after he died, I had to figure out how to eat a smorgasbord. And, where did I find what I needed from different people rather than just one? And so various friends taught me I needed to think about what is it I needed and who could I get it from.
There's a lot of, I think that's really funny, calling it a meal. There's a lot of, I think, when particularly with like grief, obviously grief covers everything, but with bereavement and like breakups, we have a lot of questions of who am I away from this person.
Yes.
I was going to gesture this way, but you can't see my hand. And I think that the way that you talked about it, like food is really particularly great because it's domestic. It's something we're all familiar with. Where, it's hard to, when you have friendships that are attached to that person, and you are my friend's wife, right? You're not Elaine.
Yes.
That's fully different from being my friend Elaine.
Yes, very, very different. Yes, because my role is defined by something else other than me.
I mean, I've even had that like with family members, just because I have family members who are better known, right?
Right, of course. Yeah.
We all have that at some point, but that's my point here, is that we've all experienced that one way or another, having to find the self outside of being someone's something.
Yes, yeah. And that journey is, I think it's easier, as complicated as it is, it's also a little bit easier, at least for a woman my age, to understand myself as someone who belonged to someone. I mean, that might just be part of the culture I grew up in. It might be different for younger women now, but I very much attached myself to that identity. Mark was a mover and shaker in the national church. And so for the friends I went to seminary with told me that when I first got there, I identified myself as Mark's wife. When I left, I identified myself as Elaine.
Oh.
Yeah. So that was all part of having to claim me rather than being a part of something other than me.
And also, I mean, I think, I don't know, maybe everyone doesn't know this, but the role of pastor's wife is a thing.
It is a thing. Yes.
And I guess, no, definitely not everyone knows that, because I remember when I learned it, I was probably in high school. So like, I just to say that that's, 4 more layers of profound.
It is a thing. And I think we try not to make it a thing in today's world of liberated woman, but it's still a thing. And it's a thing for the spouse, whether it's a male or a female, because it's a public office. And when you're in a public office, there's roles that people put on you in a public office.
I remember I used to work, this is relevant, what do you know, at a center for trauma and loss. And I remember there's this older couple who volunteered there. I volunteered there. And one was a pastor and one was the pastor's wife, which is also like its own job, right?
Right.
And the way she talked about coping with that was really, really powerful. Like some days she could not be a pastor's wife. She needed to be a person. And so she would stay home and she would clean floor to ceiling because she couldn't be in some other role. And that's really powerful. And I think something that we don't think about enough, at least, the roles that we take on as individuals versus the individual. I just think as a society, this is useful things to think about.
Yeah, no matter if it's a pastor's wife or if it's the wife of the mayor or the husband of the mayor or the partner of some public office, no matter who, male or female.
All those books that the title is like the something's female relative, right? None are coming to mind now though.
That's all right.
The alchemist's daughter.
The alchemist, yeah, right.
The time traveler's wife.
Right.
But it's always the profession's lady relative.
Yes, it is. It is.
So
a lot of the book then goes on to figure out who I was, who am I, and part of the role of any marriage relationship, I think, is when the partner dies. When the partner dies, there is a sense of, I have to find out who I am now. Who am I without this part of me? Because part of me died when he died. And I had to figure out what would be resurrected, what would grow, what would be new that I hadn't experienced before.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought it back to the book. I want to know how you decided on telling the full, because this is a big book.
Yeah, it's about 300 pages, I think.
Well, you use really good paper, so it's heavy. No,
yeah.
It's longer than 300 pages.
Yeah, at the end, yeah, it's 330 pages of story. And then at the end, I had a dear friend who led many, Lynn Batcher Robinson led a lot of grief groups. And I asked her if she would write some questions at the end that would integrate the story with general reflection for small groups or people dealing with loss and grief and new life.
I wanted to, I had these pages marked, but then I took them out when I was reading. So the first section is it's got to be the longest, right? It's 100 pages.
Yes, the first section is the longest.
And I feel like if I were to assume, I would think you were writing the first section, and that would be the story, and then the next 3 followed. Obviously, when you're telling a story, beyond the grave comes after the burial.
Right.
But how did you decide to add, beyond? Were you just not done writing?
I was not done. Well, there were more stories to tell, a lot more stories to tell, because, and actually the division of this happened after I had written the whole thing. And then I sat down. I had initially wrote 13 chapters around very specific things. One chapter was about the journeys that I took, the travels that I took, and what I learned about my traveling along the way. And another chapter was about dating and the various men that I dated in being a 60-year-old woman and the craziness of all of that. And then after I wrote the whole thing, I had to make sense of how to lay it out. And it made more sense to do shorter stories about specific incidents. And then those became divided into the 4 parts. I needed to end with a sense of resolution because my grief journey was 10 years. So it just didn't happen in a year and a half. There was a long walk. And my finding Terry and remarrying 10 years after Mark died was a significant part of the journey, in that it brought out a part of me that I never knew existed and called forth from me a sense of openness to embrace a world bigger than I could imagine.
That's so beautiful. Now Terry's a writer.
Terry's a writer, yes.
What? I know I've met him, but for whatever reason, I never connected you two as a couple.
We kept our own last names. So
yeah. Oh yeah, I get that a lot. I didn't change my last name when I got married, and people are often like, so where's Mr. Elgatian? And I'm like, my father is not coming.
Yes.
So what's that like, being married to another artist?
Oh, he is.
Now that you yourself know that you're an artist.
Yeah, now that I know I'm a writer, Terry, his greatest gift, when he writes, he's able to write in really concise way with more limited words, but words that are fully embracing. In fact, he wrote that little poem that starts the 4th section of the book. That's Terry's writing, where he says, let's see if I can find it. Well, anyway, I will find it and then respond here. His greatest gift to me is his critique of my writing. And what we've learned to do together is, we've learned together that what I initially need from him is, I'm like a little kid, where I bring a painting that I just, it's like, this is my drawing, isn't this cool? And I need to bring it to someone who tells me how wonderful I am. and then when I'm ready for critique, then I'll say to Terry, okay, now I need from you to look at the writing, what needs to change, what needs to be more concise, and then he'll critique my writing and help rewrite some parts of it to be a little cleaner and a little sharper. And so that's how we work our writing together, is he does that for me, and then occasionally I'll do that for him as well. So
I also married an artist, but we do not work the same way. And if I show him my work, he'll be like, that's nice, and or have a critique that has nothing to do with what I'm working on. So I'm really glad that you two can work as a team.
Well, it's only after I have to get this protective shell around me to not take the critique of the writing personally, but as what's on the page.
No, so that's a really important thing, I think, for all artists to learn. I try to not always be specific to writers, because I think there's so much overlap in all of the arts. But I have learned, and it's taken me some time, that I can't show the piece right away, because I'm too attached to it emotionally. And while there may well be plenty of things to fix or work on, I know that in that first, like, I once it's finished, I really want to show everyone. So probably need some praise right there. Thank you. But I know it's going to take at least a week for me to emotionally distance myself enough to be able to take criticism. I think probably all artists need to remember that you and your work are not the same thing. They're really, really difficult thing to figure out.
It's hard to separate that out, that those are two different things. And
And
to
they
remind
came out
myself
of
that
me.
it is.
But your children are not you either.
Remind myself of that as well. Absolutely.
I didn't mean. Um, how did you know you were done writing? I mean, presumably you're not done writing as a human, but the book.
No, but how did I know the book was done? I knew the book was done when my understanding of love came to a fullness.
Wonderful.
I said, well, I was dating and looking for someone to love again, that I had loved well once and I wanted to love again. And I dated some really weird men, and there was one weightlifter who tried to impress me with his muscles and his strong belief in Jesus that just was so different than mine that it just didn't work. Anyway, I came to realize that I couldn't be married to a dead man, that I had to let go of the old story. I also wanted to understand love in a bigger way. And with Terry being an agnostic, that kind of forced me to see that and live into understanding that this respect of difference is basically what love is. And so I did this search for a partner, but just a couple years ago, I read some work by Rumi, who is a mystic poet from the Muslim tradition. And Rumi says he lost a loved dear one in his life, a dear friend. And he said that his looking for love and that empty place within him of looking for love was actually a longing to find the holy.
That's so beautiful.
And so then if the holy is this profound love, then that's some of what I think I was looking for. And I found Terry, and bigger than that, I became very aware of a loving presence in the world that unites us all and connects us with each other and everything in the world in a way that's bigger than I ever could have imagined the 65 years before I was remarried.
That's one of my something I notice a lot in folks who had a beautiful marriage and then marry again. Is just there's this pureness to that love. These people, are so full of love. Trying not to like go into that topic, but my brain
well, it's a real gift to kind of see glimpses. So it's kind of all that it is just see glimpses of it along the way.
So I think this time moved really fast, but I still have a couple things I want to touch on with
you.
Sure. If that's all right.
Got it. You bet.
I want to say, I think that the word choice for your title, My Walk with Grief, not through grief, not around grief, not in grief, is so good. Other languages don't have as many prepositions as we do. And so, one word may encompass several things. But the way that you talk about writing and experiencing grief, you have used the word with a lot. And I think that's very, very significant. You are experiencing something alongside, in conjunction with, in maybe not a partnership, but you're experiencing this life with grief. You're not inside it. It is not inside you, but it's something with you. And I'm very, very grateful for the way that you talk about it. One, because I care a lot about word choice, because I care a lot about words, but two, because I don't think that's how we generally, as people in the West, think about it. I think that we think that strong feelings overtake us or become our identity. And you're saying I am existing with my grief. And I think that alone is a really, I'm gonna use the word profound again, is a really profound statement. Just the title of your book. I think that it seems innocuous. You're like, okay, my walk with grief. But the more I hear you talk about it, the more I read it. And I will say, for folks who are who I've maybe scared off from the book, it is the kind of book that I can pick up again. I don't feel like I have to start over every time I set it down. The story continues, the story stays with you. It isn't, I'm not losing the narrative when I set it down and pick it back up. So don't be scared off from this book. It is really powerful. And I do recommend it again, even though I haven't finished. Normally I read someone's work and have a full statement to say. But I know my limits.
Yes. Understood.
So I think probably because you have that insight as a therapist or a pastor, those are two roles where you work with people really, really closely at potentially their most vulnerable. You probably just have more nuance on the topic than a lot of us who.
Oh, yeah, it might be. I would think most of that comes from the therapy work of sitting with people's stories and holding them gently and listening deeply and letting them know that they're not alone. I mean, there's that with word again.
Yes.
Is that it's we don't do this alone.
I think that's so important. I guess I wanted to ask you why you chose it, and then I just danced around it instead.
Well, I worked a lot on which word to use. Was it through or with or what under or around or whatever? But I had some friends help me get to the word with. So
at.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm so glad. Your friends did you proper. And then is there more to come?
Oh, I'm kind of wondering about that. I have had lots of world travels in my lifetime, and have had, the book talks about some of the world travels and some of the mystical and bizarre experiences I've had along the way. And I would like to tell some more stories about my world travel and what I've kind of learned as I've walked in other cultures. So that's currently what I'm writing about. We'll see whether I think it's public worthy, but right now it's my story. So.
Oh, that was a question. I'm so sorry. I will totally let you go at 2, I promise.
Oh.
So selfishly, I hope that you do continue to publish. Of course, there's lots of venues for publishing. Legacy Book Press, for those wondering, is a Memoir exclusive
Yes.
publisher. So if
Jody, I'm gonna add quickly, Jody too, he was amazingly helpful and continues to be. So thank you to Jody for all that help.
Yeah, they put out, and I mean, Jody puts out great work for sure.
Yeah.
But if, say, you were not writing another memoir, that probably wouldn't be the next home. But I want to say selfishly, I do hope that you do continue. I know I've been thinking a lot about your potential for anthologies, right? For those stories. I mean, to create your own anthology of dating stories, travel stories, whatever it may be, because your felicity is, I got to use the word felicity, is so strong. You get language.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Today we'll talk about how much I love Elaine's writing. Is there anything you want to add about the writing process, about how you feel as a writer, why you write those journals?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I often get stuck in writing and thought that I would have to feel the energy to go to the page to write. And sometimes that's true, but most of the time I just have to grunt something out and then see where it goes.
That's advice I give a lot when I'm talking about like writer's block,
Yeah,
is to journal until you're not blocked up anymore.
yeah. The journal writing for me is really central to what I put on the page. There's a sense I've learned to write in a journal without censorship, and I just write whatever I write. And a lot of the book was going back to the journal and reading some of the things that I wrote and just seeing what those stories were and what that was about. Um, I I probably write more from my heart than I do from my head. And as I write, I get surprised what comes out, especially in journal writing. I've discovered that I began doing morning pages with Cameron's work. And what I discovered in my notebook when I was doing it was that whenever I got to page 3, I was surprised by what I understood. I got surprised by what came out of me. I went, oh, I didn't know that. So that's a thing about writing that I also get very curious about, because I didn't know the meaning of why I wrote the book until I started writing it. Mark had said a couple things to me when he was dying that I never understood, and I didn't understand until I started to write the memoir. So
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I'm so grateful for someone to so believe in journaling. I think that lots of us writers think that that's not something we have to do, and no one's obligated to do anything,
no,
but it
no.
can be so helpful.
Yeah, for me, it opens up the door to what's really inside, not what I think I should be saying.
Totally.
Mhm.
And Morning Pages, if I'm not mistaken, is from the Artist's Way. That's where
Yes,
yeah.
yeah.
I put
Mhm.
that in the chat, and then I was like, oh, what if that's the wrong title?
No, it's from the Artist's Way. Yeah, it is. Great.
Anything else you want to leave us with?
No, other than I'm honored to be part of this interview and the good work that Midwest Writers does and has for the community. And I look forward to sharing my book whenever I can. So thank you very much.
I'm so grateful to have had you, to have met you, to have read you. And for folks who are interested in reading Elaine's work, I didn't warn her about this, and we don't have time now, but I was gonna ask her to read a bit. I'll recommend that you do that. There's a preview, I believe, on the Legacy Book website. Maybe I made that up. Okay, cool. I have put those links in the chat for folks who are maybe watching on YouTube. Those links are in the description. But you can buy it at St. Paul's Bookshop, the Artsy Bookworm in Rock Island, Book Rack in is that in Davenport or Bettendorf? It's by Target.
I think.
It's by Target. And
Amazon, all of those other, yeah.
All those links are in the chat as well. I highly recommend finding whatever way you can to contact or be in touch with Elaine and her work. And of course, as always, we want you to please write more light in your life. I will give some really, really quick updates on the Writing Center and leave you with a prompt, but we're gonna just shut down the meeting here in a second so that nobody has to stay too long. Upcoming things that we have on Thursday for Write More Light, we'll have another Lutheran pastor, Emily Newton, will talk about writing sermons and poetry and how they intersect and how they inform her writing. Then we will have, that morning, Thursday as well, 10 a.m., Shishwen Collins will be on Talk of Iowa talking about her book from Midwest Writing Center Press, which is next to me. Yes, it is. Flowing Water, Falling Flowers. Obviously, you should buy it. You should read it. You should give it to all your friends. And then Saturday, we will return to our regularly scheduled writers studio. That's 11 to 1, the first and third Saturday of every month. I'm the host. We're meeting on Zoom. All you got to do is email me. I guess I'll throw my email address in the chat here, and say, hey, I want to be part of that. And talking and typing is difficult to do at the same time. And we will get you that Zoom link. We have more things. February 9th, we'll start our next workshop series, which is called The Heartwork of Writing. It's with poet Tanea Winder. It is for women and femmes only. And that'll be a generative workshop in which we really dig into who we are as writers, where the writing comes from, and then do a lot of writing. That's all I'm going to say for now. For your writing prompt today, I hope that you will think about, journal on, write a story about, guess what? Grief. Thank you again, Elaine.
Very welcome.
To Legacy Book Press. And as always, please write more light into your life.